I discovered something that changed my life forever. I was living a lie, while the man I married, the man I trusted, was betraying me and using our money in the most deceitful way. For months, I watched from the sidelines, collecting evidence, and waiting for the right moment to expose the truth. Have you ever felt like that? Like your whole life was a lie, and then suddenly, everything falls apart right in front of you? In this video, I'm going to take you through every step of this journey, how I was deceived and how in the end, I found the strength to start over. Stick with me until the end, because what's coming next will surprise you. It was an ordinary morning in London, but something was in the air. I knew something wasn't right. Mark, my husband, had always been attentive and dedicated, but in the past few months I started noticing small changes, things that used to go unnoticed, but now stood out. The scent of women's perfume on his shirt, the excuse that he was working late, which repeated itself more and more often. None of this seemed normal anymore, but what really made me start questioning was a strange expense on the bank statement, a significant amount paid at the Ivy, an upscale restaurant in Covent Garden, and just below it, another transaction at a luxury store on Bond Street, buying an item that couldn't be explained. What was going on? I didn't want to believe it, but the clues were there, clearly visible. The lies were no longer subtle, and I started noticing that Mark's excuses were becoming more and more flimsy. I felt betrayed, but at the same time, doubt gnawed at me. After all, what was harder to deal with? The potential betrayal or the uncertainty of not knowing the truth? I decided that I couldn't act on impulse. I needed to be smart. My first decision was to start observing more closely. Without him noticing, I began making notes, from the strange hours to the quick phone calls that he tried to hide. But, like any woman in my place, I was torn between the desire to know the truth and the fear of discovering something I didn't want to face. I needed proof, something irrefutable. Over time, I started doing some research on my own. I read about financial fraud, how to detect it, and what to do when someone doesn't pay off shared debts in a marriage. The idea of being deceived this way didn't seem possible, but on the other hand, I knew I was getting closer and closer to uncovering the truth, whatever it might be. This first chapter of our story was just the beginning. It was the moment when doubt started to grow and the life that seemed perfect began to unravel. I didn't know what was coming, but one thing was certain. I was about to enter a path with no return. A path where the truth would be the only thing that could save me. As the days went by, I felt this uncomfortable sensation, like the truth was always lurking, just waiting to be revealed. At first, I wanted to ignore everything that was happening. I tried convincing myself that I was overreacting, that they were just coincidences. But as time passed, the clues became clearer, harder to ignore. I knew I couldn't keep living in this spiral of doubt and fear. I needed something concrete. I needed proof. So, I decided to be more strategic. Instead of confronting Mark directly, as my instincts told me to, I needed to find something that would leave him defenseless, something irrefutable. I knew he always went out on Wednesday nights to play football with his friends, so I started asking myself, what did he do during the rest of the week when he claimed he was working late? It was one of these nights that I decided to follow my instincts. I dressed discreetly and went out to roam the city. I wanted to find some sign, anything that could help me understand what was happening. I passed by some luxury stores on Bond Street, places he frequented when shopping. Nothing unusual there. I went to the restaurant where he had made the strange transaction and started asking the staff discreetly, as if I was looking for a place for a future meal. They told me he had been there a few times, but always paid in cash, never used his credit card. That made me more alert. He was hiding something, no doubt. Then, the next day, as I went through the bank statements again, I found something even more alarming. A large sum had been transferred to an account that wasn't in his or my name. The name was Sarah Silva, an unfamiliar woman to me, but with the same last name. I tried to control the anger rising inside me. Sarah Silva. How could it be possible that he was involved with another woman? As much as the idea of confronting him directly seemed tempting, I knew his reaction would be the same as always. Deny it. Try to manipulate the situation. Make me feel crazy. This was no longer about trusting him or not, but about my ability to understand what was going on and decide what to do with that truth. I needed to know who Sarah Silva was. So I decided to hire a private investigator. Maybe it was time to do things the right way, no matter how difficult it was. I made the call and set up a meeting. My emotions were on edge, but I had to stay calm. Whatever was uncovered would be the key to understanding this whole situation. All I had left to do now was wait. The day of the meeting with the private investigator finally arrived. I was nervous, but I knew I couldn't delay it any longer. The moment to discover what was going on, no matter how difficult it was, had to come. That day, as I entered the investigator's office, I was overwhelmed with a mixture of insecurity and determination. I was ready to face the truth, even if it meant my life would turn upside down. The investigator, Peter, seemed calm and experienced. He asked me some initial questions and told me to explain everything I knew. Carefully, I began to recount the incidents: the strange expenses, the unfamiliar perfume smells, Mark's flimsy excuses, and even the mysterious transaction with the name Sarah Silva. Peter took notes attentively, asking very few questions. I was finally starting to feel that the pieces were falling into place. And with that, a sense of relief began to grow inside me. "We'll start the investigation immediately," he said with a smile. "Don't worry, we'll find out who this woman is and what's going on." In the following days, Peter began updating me on his progress. He managed to uncover that Sarah Silva wasn't just any woman. She was indeed involved with Mark. Their connection was deeper than I had imagined. She wasn't just a lover. She worked at his company, and they had a relationship that went beyond professional. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. The anger and pain were overwhelming. How could he do this to me? How could he betray me this way? It wasn't just the emotional betrayal, but the financial one. Mark had been using our money, our joint account, to sustain this relationship. And here I was, trying to ignore the evidence, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Peter then said something that made me think even more. This woman isn't just someone he's having an affair with. She has access to financial information. And from what I'm seeing, he's hurting you in ways you can't even imagine. That stopped me. Those words hit me like a slap in the face. My husband wasn't just cheating on me with another woman. He was involved in something much more serious, something that could affect my financial security. What he was doing wasn't just emotional betrayal, but fraud. Fraud that could destroy everything we had built together. I knew I had to act quickly. The evidence was right there, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. Over the week, Peter continued the investigation, and with each new discovery, the feeling of betrayal grew. Mark was indeed hiding financial secrets from me, concealing transactions, and using our money for his own benefit. Every revelation I heard made me feel more and more powerless, but it also made me more determined to act. And then came the moment of decision. How was I going to face Mark? What was I going to do with all this? I couldn't live with this pain and fear any longer. I knew that the truth was the key to moving forward, but I didn't know what would come next. The days following the meeting with the investigator were the hardest. Every step I took, every thought that crossed my mind, reminded me of Mark's betrayal. I knew I had to do something, but the fear of facing the truth once and for all paralyzed me. It wasn't just about divorcing him. It was about confronting the reality that the man I had spent so many years with was hiding something so deep and so painful. Mark was becoming more and more evasive. He was spending more time away from home, and his excuses for the delays were getting more elaborate. I knew it was time to act, but I didn't know how he would react. The thought of confronting him and putting him on the spot terrified me. But on the other hand, I knew I couldn't live with the doubt and the lies any longer. Each day, the weight of the situation grew. That afternoon, after receiving another update from the investigator, I decided it was time. I already knew enough to face Mark head-on. The truth was within my reach, and I couldn't hide anymore. The conversation would be difficult, I knew that, but it was necessary. I needed to understand just how far he was willing to go to keep up what he was doing. And most of all, I needed to put an end to the lies. I mentally prepared myself for what was to come. I walked into his office where he usually stayed after work with that relaxed demeanor, pretending everything was normal. When he saw me walk in, he smiled, but quickly noticed something strange in my gaze. He knew something was wrong, but he had no idea just how much I knew. "What's wrong, darling? Everything okay?" he asked, trying to act casual. But I was no longer willing to pretend that nothing was going on. "Mark, we need to talk. I know everything. About you and Sarah, about the lies, about what you're doing with our money," I said without beating around the bush. I saw him pale for a second, but he quickly tried to regain his composure. He stood up from his chair and started pacing around, as if looking for an escape from what was about to happen. "You don't know what you're talking about, do you? This is all a misunderstanding," he tried to justify. But I didn't let him. I already knew too much. I knew he was lying, and the evidence was irrefutable. "I know enough to know that you've been cheating on me. And not just that, Mark. You've been using our money to support this woman, and I'm not going to accept it anymore," I said, firmer than I ever imagined I could be. He stopped and looked at me for a moment, as if trying to understand what was going on. The man who was always so confident now seemed unsure and didn't know what to say. Then, the anger that had been building inside me overflowed. "You've betrayed me. With another woman. With my own money. And now you want to keep lying to me, pretending that nothing is wrong? I'm no longer the woman you can deceive. I'm done, Mark. Done with all the lies, with all the emotional turmoil. Enough." I didn't know what he would do next. He seemed more lost than ever, trying to justify himself, apologizing, but his words no longer had any effect on me. I listened to him speak, but I didn't care anymore. The damage had been done, and the wreckage was irreversible. "I know I made a mistake. I just wanted a chance to fix everything," he said, his voice almost pleading. But I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to know. The trust I once had in him was shattered. "You had all the chances, Mark, and you lost them. There's no going back. Now, it's time to face the consequences of your choices. And your choices, my dear, won't just affect our marriage. They'll affect your life, and you will pay for it," I said, with a cold, unwavering voice. I knew this was what he needed to hear. He needed to face reality. He stood in silence for a few seconds, visibly shaken. I watched him, and for the first time in a long time, I realized I was no longer the vulnerable one. I was the strong woman, the one who knew what she wanted and wasn't afraid to move forward. After a tense silence, he finally spoke. "What are you going to do now?" I looked at him with a determined gaze and said, "I'm going to fight for myself, and I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild my life. The rest, well, the rest is up to you. I'm no longer responsible for your mistakes." And with those words, I felt the weight of all the suffering being lifted from me. The truth was finally out in the open, and I was ready to move forward. The day after the confrontation was a whirlwind of emotions. The night before, after Mark left, my body was still trembling from the adrenaline. I knew I was on the right path, but the feeling of emptiness was overwhelming. Reality was starting to settle in. I had finally confronted Mark, but I had no idea how things would unfold from here. I was alone, and for the first time in years, loneliness didn't scare me. In fact, it was oddly comforting. It was as if I had finally freed myself from a silent prison, and the air I breathed was, in some way, lighter. I spent the rest of the day trying to process everything that had happened. There was so much to organize, so many issues to resolve. The first thing I knew I had to do was seek support. For years, I had focused on Mark, the kids, everything that involved the family. But now, I needed to focus on myself. I didn't know exactly what my future would hold, but one thing was clear. I didn't want to rely on anyone else to be happy. That's when I remembered Clara. Clara, my lifelong best friend, had always been there for me, listening to me during the hardest times, encouraging me in moments of doubt. I knew she would be the one person who needed to be near me right now. So, I picked up the phone and called her. "Hey, Clara, do you have some time to talk?" She immediately noticed the tone of my voice, and soon I heard her warm and welcoming response. "Of course, dear. I'll be over in half an hour. I'll bring coffee and some chocolate, all right? I know you'll need it." I laughed at her response, something I hadn't done in a long time. Clara arrived at my house in less than half an hour. When she walked in, she gave me a tight hug and sat beside me without saying a word. Sometimes no words were needed. Clara's presence, the silence between us, was all the comfort I needed. "I know you've probably already told Mark everything, but tell me what happened. How are you feeling?" she asked, with a sincere and worried look. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. It wasn't easy to admit what I was feeling. For years, I had always tried to show that everything was under control, but now the fragility of my soul was exposed. "I'm lost, Clara. Part of me still can't believe what happened. For so long, I didn't see anything. I believed Mark's words, his excuses, his empty promises. Now, everything he did, it doesn't make sense. I feel like I wasted so much time. And at the same time, I don't know what to do with the freedom I have left." She looked at me with a deep gaze and calmly responded, "I understand, my friend. And you have every right to feel this way. But remember what I told you the other day? Freedom sometimes can feel terrifying. Because when we spend so much time waiting for someone else, for love, for approval, we forget about ourselves. But now, you have a chance to be who you really are, and it's not too late for that." Her words hit me deeply. Clara had always been good at helping me see the positive side of things, even when I was in pieces. She was right. I had lived for so long waiting for Mark to be responsible for my happiness, that now I could finally look for that happiness within myself. She reminded me of the importance of being independent, of being at peace with myself before seeking approval from anyone. I had been a hostage in a relationship that was slowly destroying me, and now I had the chance to rebuild myself. "Are you afraid of starting over?" Clara asked softly. I looked at her, hesitating. The fear had always been there, but it was the fear of the unknown, of the new, of the future I didn't know how to build. "Yes, I'm afraid. But at the same time, I feel like I have no choice. I want to live, Clara. I don't want to be the woman who waits for something that never comes. I want to be the woman who makes things happen." Clara smiled, proud of me, and took my hand, squeezing it tightly. "That's the woman you've always been. Now, it's time to look ahead." And with those words, I began to understand what was to come. The healing process would be long, but I was determined to move forward. I had Clara's support, and that was enough to take the first step. I knew there would still be many battles ahead, but now I felt stronger than ever. I wasn't lost anymore. I was on the path to my own reconstruction, and most importantly, I had made a decision. I was moving forward. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I looked at the screen and saw the number of my lawyer, the same one who had been helping me with the divorce process. I knew he was calling to give me an update on the situation with Mark. My heart skipped a beat for a moment, as if the mere mention of Mark's name still had the power to affect me. But I quickly calmed myself. I had made a decision, and this was just part of the process. I was determined to move forward. I answered the phone with the firmest voice I could muster. "Hello, Mr. Ribeiro. How are things going?" His voice on the other end was calm, but with a serious tone. "Hello, Sophia. I was just trying to reach you to update you on the status of your case. As you can probably imagine, the situation with your ex-husband is starting to get more complicated. Mark is not cooperating in the way we expected, and it's important that you know this before we take the next steps." My breath grew heavier. I knew Mark would try to evade responsibility, that he would try to escape unscathed. He had always been like that, selfish and manipulative. And now, he was trying to do the same, even though he had been caught in his lies. I was prepared for this. "I know he's going to deny everything, but what is he claiming?" I asked, trying to keep my composure. "He's trying to dismiss the fraud accusations. He claims that the property he bought under your name was a management error and that the transaction wasn't illegal. He's also claiming that the expenses for the car and the other gifts were presents for the company employees, and that this was within normal business practices. In other words, he's trying to blame the company and his superiors, trying to evade responsibility." I let out a bitter laugh, feeling a lump in my throat. How could he still lie with such audacity? He wasn't just betraying me emotionally. He was trying to drag me into his financial lies, making me an accomplice in something he had masterminded. "And what can we do now?" I asked, my tone indicating I had no patience left for his lies. "We've already filed a formal report with the police, based on the evidence you've provided us. This will help with the legal process, but the next step will be to gather more proof about the property transaction. If Mark continues his lies, the financial proof will be crucial for the accusation. The investigation is ongoing." I remained silent for a few seconds, absorbing the lawyer's words. Everything Mark had done was now a bigger burden than he could bear. He had no idea what was coming. I knew this wasn't the end, but we were getting closer to seeing justice done. Finally, he would pay for his actions. "I trust you, Mr. Ribeiro. Let's keep going with what we're doing. I won't let him get away with it." "I'm sure of that, Sophia. And remember, we're here to help you through this. We'll keep you updated with the next steps." I hung up the phone and sat there, staring into space, feeling a mix of relief and anger. Relief because I knew things were finally moving in my favor. Anger because, despite everything he had done to me, he was still trying to manipulate the situation. I would never again be the woman waiting for empty promises and pathetic excuses. That's when I decided it was time to start acting differently. I needed to begin thinking about my future, my independence, and what I wanted for myself. Anger wasn't going to get me anywhere, but action would. I went to my office and grabbed the car keys. It was time to get out. I had been cooped up in the house, in the marriage, in my own pain for far too long. But now, I needed to breathe new air. I needed to find myself. The car moved down the road, and with every mile I felt a freedom I hadn't experienced in years. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew I was heading towards something new. And that alone was a huge step. After so long, I was starting to realize that the control of my life was finally in my hands. I decided to pass by the coast of Cascais, a place I had always loved. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks, the fresh sea breeze. It all felt like a symbol of something new, something emerging within me. It was as if the sea was washing away all the pains of the past, preparing me for what was to come. It was time to start dreaming again, and I was ready for it. I didn't exactly know what to expect from myself when I left Cascais that afternoon. The sea breeze was still in my hair, and the sound of the waves still echoed in my mind. Everything felt different, as if the air I was breathing was lighter, clearer, full of possibilities. I was feeling a freedom I hadn't felt in a long time, but at the same time, the reality of the situation with Mark was still very present in my mind. He hadn't disappeared, and the weight of the divorce was becoming more real every day. When I arrived home, I still felt the weight of everything. That had happened, but at the same time, something inside me told me that this was the moment to reinvent myself. The house was quiet, the same old furniture, the walls I knew so well. But there was a strange feeling, something new, something I had never experienced here. I was alone, but solitude now felt like a space of possibilities, not fear or anguish. Took off my coat and hung it up in the hallway, taking in the familiar smell of my house, which now seemed different. I went to the couch and sank into it, trying to process everything that had happened in the past few months. The divorce, the fraud, Mark's lies. Everything was starting to come together, and the feeling that I was in control grew stronger every day. But at the same time, I knew that the biggest challenge was still ahead. Starting over. How do I move forward? How do I create a new life for myself after years of being controlled and manipulated? I knew this wouldn't be easy, but I also knew I couldn't keep living in the past. That time had run out. I picked up my phone and opened the messaging app. I found a message from Amanda, a friend who had always supported me during the marriage but had distanced herself when things started to get more complicated. She knew what Mark had been doing, but like so many others, she was afraid to get involved. Her friendship had been a reflection of my own submission, of my fear of doing what was right for myself. Now it was time to reconnect. I was ready to step outside my comfort zone and face my own fears. Amanda had sent me a simple message saying, "I'm here for you. If you need anything, let me know." It was a simple gesture, but full of meaning. I knew our friendship needed healing. And that's what I was going to do. I took a deep breath and decided to call Amanda. Not as the fragile woman who always sought approval, but as someone who was rebuilding herself, someone who no longer depended on others to feel good about herself. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. "Hi, Amanda. I know it's been a while, but I wanted to talk to you," I said, my voice firm, yet with a hint of vulnerability. She sounded surprised, but didn't hesitate to respond. "Sophia, of course. I was thinking about you too. How are you?" I smiled when I heard her voice. I knew our conversation would be the first step toward what I wanted, a new life, free from the shadows of Mark, free from the marks of the manipulation he had left on me. We were starting something new, and I was ready to move forward, with her or without her, but I knew that having her support would be a great strength. We talked for hours, reminiscing about the past but also talking about the future. What did I want for myself? What would my next step be? Amanda, always so realistic, helped me map out some possibilities. She suggested I start with a personal project, something that challenged me and made me feel alive again. Maybe learn something new, go back to studying, or even start a small business. The conversation was a turning point. I realized there was so much more to do, and that life didn't have to be limited by the past. The possibilities were endless, and all I had to do was choose which path to follow. I still didn't know what the future held for me, but I was determined to be the author of my own story. I had a new perspective, a new beginning. As the days passed, I began reconnecting with the things I loved, the things I had left behind during the marriage. Mark had been a constant presence, and I had lost myself in his manipulations and lies for so long that now Every moment of freedom made me feel as if I was rediscovering the world around me. But I knew that, to move forward, I needed to strengthen the foundations of my new life, build a solid base that would support me through the process of starting over. The first step was my house. I needed a space that reflected who I was now, a woman renewed, strengthened, and ready to embrace her own freedom. I spent days organizing the house, rearranging furniture, changing the decor. Those walls, which had once imprisoned me, were now transforming into a frame for my new life. I painted the rooms in lighter tones, added plants, and hung inspirational paintings. Every change represented a conscious decision that my life was transforming, and I was in control. I also started paying more attention to myself. I signed up for yoga and meditation classes, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. I knew that inner balance would be crucial to keeping me focused on what really mattered. Furthermore, my mental health needed to be treated with more care, so I began seeking therapy, a space to understand the emotions that were still well guarded inside me. What surprised me the most, however, was the impact these small changes had on me. I began to feel like I was reconnecting with the woman I had been before everything started falling apart. A confident, independent woman who had her own dreams and didn't live to please anyone. No longer was I Sophia lost in Mark's lies, but a new version of myself, stronger, more resilient. One day, while I was at the cafe Mark and I used to frequent, I saw an acquaintance I hadn't seen in years, Marta. She was one of the few people who had always been there for me but had also distanced herself due to the chaos of my marriage. She saw me, and the surprise was evident on her face. She approached quickly and gave me a warm hug. "Sophia, it's so good to see you," she exclaimed with a genuine smile. We sat down, and the conversation flowed naturally. Marta asked about what had been happening, and I realized that, in a way, everyone around me had stayed silent while I was immersed in my own life. I felt relieved to finally speak openly. I was honest with her about the situation with Mark and how I was moving forward. She listened attentively without judgment, and at the end she said, "Sophia, you don't need to carry that weight anymore. I know it was hard, but now it's time to free yourself from everything that held you back. I always knew you were stronger than you thought, and you deserve so much more than that." Hearing those words was like a blessing. I felt validated, and the pain I had been carrying began to dissipate. I knew I wasn't alone in this process, and that there were people who believed in me. When she left, I sat there in silence, absorbing the conversation. Something inside me had changed, and I knew that, with people like Marta by my side, I could face anything. I returned home, and as I walked in, I looked around. The house was starting to feel more like a home, my home. Everything was falling into place, and more importantly, I was falling into place again. What seemed like an ending now felt like the beginning of a new journey. I went to the kitchen, made some tea, and sat down at my new workspace. I wanted to focus on my next steps. What were my goals now? How would I build my new life, and perhaps even my career? I had some ideas. I began planning the possibility of opening a small business, something that would allow me to be the boss of my time and, at the same time, fulfill me professionally. And so, as time passed, I knew my future was in my hands. Time was passing. Strangely, almost as if the days were longer now that I was alone, but in a good way. I was no longer carrying the weight of a heavy lie every day. On the contrary, I was feeling lighter, rediscovering my own pace, my freedom. When I thought the worst was behind me, I realized the future was just beginning to unfold before me. Now, more than ever, I was determined to move forward. I had begun to reorganize my life, but I knew this transformation had to be deep, not just about what was happening at home. I needed to reconnect with my work and passions, give a new direction to my career, something that would make me feel fulfilled again. Life couldn't just be about surviving. It needed to be about truly living with purpose. It was then that something unexpected happened. An old colleague from work called me, Anna. The last time we spoke was years ago, before I married Mark. She was one of the few people I really connected with during my years in the workforce. Although we had lost contact, whenever we met, the conversation flowed easily. She called to invite me to a meeting, saying she had an interesting proposal. Anna had always been a very successful and visionary woman. When she said there was a vacancy in her company, I didn't know what to expect. She told me about a consultancy position opening up, and she believed I had the necessary skills. The proposal was appealing. She knew what I had been through and told me she had a unique opportunity for me. I hesitated for a moment, thinking about how I had distanced myself from all of this, but at the same time, I felt it was exactly what I needed. A new beginning. In a meeting in downtown Lisbon, the conversation with Anna was surprisingly natural. The meeting didn't feel formal, but rather a reunion of old friends just picking up where we left off. She explained that her company was expanding and needed someone with my experience in project management and my keen eye for organization. I knew this was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. I returned home with a different feeling. I had spent years dedicating my life to Mark and my family responsibilities, but now I was feeling that my life was returning to my control. No longer based on others, but on myself. I could finally use my experience fully and build something of my own. I applied for the position, and after a few weeks of interviews and discussions, I was called to start. The feeling of being back in the workforce was like a rebirth. For many people, work may just be a source of income, but for me, it was now a chance to rediscover myself, to pour my energy into something that wasn't just about surviving, but also about growing. Over time, I began to stand out at work, and my confidence grew with every new accomplishment. The small victories reminded me of who I really was, an intelligent, capable, and strong woman who didn't depend on anyone to feel complete. I had found a new purpose, and it was in my hands. During this reintegration process into the workforce, I also started thinking about other ways to reinvent myself. The possibility of opening my own business began to feel more real. Anna, who became a great friend, encouraged me to start considering it more seriously. You have everything to succeed, Sophia. Just allow yourself to believe in yourself, she would say, and those words echoed in my head. She saw in me something that, for a long time, I had forgotten, the power of self-confidence. And so, little by little, I began to design a new future for myself, a future where I was in control of my life and my decisions. With each step I took, I moved closer to my final goal, to be the owner of my own story. Now, with the new job, the feeling of being truly alive had never been so intense. With each passing day, I felt stronger, more in control of my life. The weeks went by, and I had finally found a routine that worked for me, one that gave me purpose, something that seemed to have disappeared during my marriage to Mark. I was rediscovering the joy in the little things, the pleasure of doing a good job, and most importantly, the satisfaction of being myself without needing to hide behind a mask. It was on a Friday afternoon, just an ordinary workday, when something unexpected happened. I was at the office, reviewing some documents, when I received a message from Anna. She invited me to a networking event happening next week in Lisbon. She knew I had been feeling a bit out of the loop since returning to work and wanted to help me expand my network. I immediately accepted. It was a chance to connect with influential people in the field I was beginning to specialize in. On the night of the event, I was nervous, but also excited. I was in a new chapter of my life, and every step I took was pulling me further from my previous life. When I arrived at the venue, an elegant hotel in downtown Lisbon, I was greeted by Anna. She was beaming with a radiant smile, and introduced me to several people from the consulting and project management fields. It was an intense and dynamic event, full of idea exchanges and new opportunities. During the event, I spoke with various people and even made a few contacts that could prove valuable in the future. But what really stood out was the conversation I had with Pedro, an executive from a large tech company Ana introduced me to. He was interested in my work, my experience in management, and the way I was reinventing myself after such a personal upheaval. The conversation flowed naturally, and by the end of the evening, he offered me the opportunity to collaborate on a specific consulting project. I left the event feeling exhilarated and grateful. Not just because I had made important contacts, but because I had taken another step toward the freedom I had longed for. Over the years I was married to Mark, I often felt trapped, as if my choices were limited. Now, everything was changing, and I was the only one responsible for my decisions. In the following days, Pedro sent me a formal proposal for the consulting project, and I began to realize how far I had come. I was no longer the woman who was afraid to leave Mark, the one who felt powerless and dependent. I was becoming someone who had the power to decide her own future. Every new project and opportunity gave me more confidence and energy. I was no longer just reacting to life. I was shaping it according to my own needs and desires. It was at that moment that the idea of starting my own business became even more real. I knew I no longer needed to wait for an uncertain future. I now had the skills, the connections, and the confidence to build something on my own. With encouragement from Ana and Pedro, I began to draft a plan for my own consulting firm, focusing on helping other women reinvent themselves and discover their true potential, just as I was doing. I knew the road wouldn't be easy, and there would be many challenges ahead. But what motivated me the most was the thought that, by building my own path, I could help others find the freedom they longed for, the freedom to be themselves, without fear, without restraints. It's fascinating how stories like this make us reflect on the boundaries we're willing to accept in a relationship. The protagonist showed incredible strength and determination by taking control of her life after being betrayed, and the way she handled the situation, exposing the betrayal, and confronting the reality, is something many people can relate to. Often, we're unsure about what to do when faced with infidelity, but this story carries a powerful lesson. We don't have to passively accept what's imposed on us. The protagonist took the reins, showing that despite the pain and suffering, there's always a way to start over and rebuild. What do you think of her reaction? Would you have done the same, or would you have chosen a different path? Hey everyone, have you ever been through something like this? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more videos like this, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you won't miss anything. Oh, and if you haven't watched the previous video, click here and check it out. I'm sure you'll be surprised. Go ahead, share your thoughts, and let's keep the conversation going.